Hello, everybody. It's Viola Manuel here from Cape Town with my very, very good friend and co-host Brigetti, who, if any of you have been watching the show, you should know that she's in terrible pain and being such a trooper to come online today. And I just want to thank you for being there and thank you for enduring all the pain and smiling through it. I know toothache is not an easy thing.
Thanks, Viola, and welcome everyone. Yes, I must say, I literally crawled out of bed to do the show because,
It's yeah.
we're on day 27 today, um, and I really didn't want to miss a day if we could possibly help it. We've been talking. It's been a wonderful journey, or should I say, it's been a privilege to be able to go live every single day and to share a thought or two about COVID-19, how it's impacted us and the people that we know, the businesses we know, the women that we know in business. Um, just to have the opportunity to check in with everyone and find out how everyone is able to pivot or not during
Mhm.
COVID-19. So, what did you think of the president's announcements yesterday? What did you make of that?
Brigitte, it was wow. I was completely in awe of just the extent and the detail to which they, the extent of the announcement. And even though it was a very short speech, the amount of detail that could be given. And I know that the devil lies in the detail, and I'm sure there's a lot of work that's going to go into being able to actually, communicate a lot more about the plan. But of course, it's now this big balancing act between lives and livelihood. I think that's really been the big concern, and I think we all understand that right from the beginning. And of course, we've had this very hard lockdown, it's very serious lockdown, and now it's really about the discussion on how do you start lifting that and giving partial access in this next phase. What was interesting for me with our discussion with Lisa and Tareen yesterday was that businesses are going to have to prepare themselves for how they are going to get back into the economy and prepare, how they're going to play a role. So one of the, I know that there's a draft document on some of the thoughts around what that limited and restricted access will look like for the public. There are new, they're going to be opening up certain spaces like, I know that there's talk of cinemas reopening, sports events reopening, convention centers reopening, etc. And but I also know that even those spaces are going to have to adhere to very strict protocols, be very clear on still managing social distancing, being able to sanitize those spaces quite well. So I think it's still going to be business unusual. It's not going to, I don't think it's going to be going to a sporting event and sitting next to your friend. You're going to literally be maybe 2 seats away from your friend. So it's still going to be a very different experience. So I think it's important for everybody to understand that although there's going to be, they're talking about access, that the public will be able to access these spaces, I think it's still going to be very different. It's going to look different. It's going to feel different. It might be the situation of queues again. You're going to have to queue to go into the cinema, 10 of you at a time, and then you first have to be seated, and then the next 10 will go. These are all just, me guessing what it's going to look like. This is not fact, and the document flow, the documents at this point in time are all in draft format. So I think it's really about, government have taken a very careful analysis. One thing I loved that the president was saying is that it's a scientific approach. He's spoken to different parts of this, of the economy, different social partners. He's consulted with them. He's spoken to them. They've had to undertake a very careful analysis of these different sectors. They've had to look at things like the multiplier effect. What would the, what are the risks of permanent closing a sector if it doesn't get opened immediately? Job creation. So I think it's really been around them doing this great balancing act, and it's really going to be about them now putting a few things in place, and then of course understanding the impact of those places. And it's going to really, in my assessment, going to really be a case of trial and error, in terms of how things are going to go. But even though there's this limited access and restricted access to new spaces for us as South Africans, having lifted, this, having this partial lockdown, it's going to be partial access, and it's still going to be a very different experience. And I think South Africans need to get themselves ready for that. What I am understanding business is going to have to do is business is going to have to get themselves ready to be COVID ready. So they're going to have to prove that they can keep their staff safe, that they can still adhere to the social distancing protocols, etc. And if business owners haven't started doing that, they need to get their teams together and start talking about how can they effectively do that. I almost think it's going to be part of a criteria. And again, we're all just guessing what this is going to look like, but it's probably going to be some kind of application process that you're going to have to go through to get your business up and running and get it open during this next phase. Two other comments finally, Brigitte, is just, I think it's important for us to recognize that, it's a lot of money. I mean, 500 billion rand, it's a lot of money. And I think my first thought when I listened to it was, it's fine to make that money available, but it's about the implementation of that. You're still asking ministers and officials to actually manage those huge amounts of money. And of course, the biggest headache that we had under the sort of state capture government was that there was so much corruption going on. And so, it's going to have to really be, the president is going to really have to entrust officials with these huge amounts of money. And, when we look at the amount of looting and the disappointing behavior with some officials, very few of them, but some officials, I do have a concern around, are they ethically and morally ready to handle these huge amounts of cash? And so, but I think my biggest feeling listening to the president was just one of admiration, and very happy to be in South Africa, very happy to be South African with such strong, decisive leadership. And I look forward to hearing what he's going to say. Finally, I think the idea of providing grants to people who are unemployed but are not qualified, they don't qualify to get any other grant. That to me is such an amazing thing, because of course all that grant money is going to contribute to stimulating the economy and getting us back on our feet, because people are going to spend that money in stores, in these the spaces that will be opened during this next phase, where we will have restricted access to, I'm supposing some restaurants will open, cinemas will open, those kinds of social spaces will open. And I think it's a good thing, because I think just in terms of people's well-being, they need to be able to get out our lockdown. I'm hearing from a lot of people are starting to get cabin fever.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting time. There's going to be a lot of eyes on the government in terms of that expenditure. It's been very disappointing that we've heard reports of looting with regards to the food that's been handed out, and so I think a lot of eyes are going to be on government with regards to how they're going to be applying those funds. The other question that I had was, are companies ready for business unusual when they return? Because sanitizing spaces also is a huge expense.
Correct.
That doesn't come for free. It's going to mean additional staff. It's going to mean sanitation equipment. So, are people even considering that that's going to become part of their everyday running expenditure, something that they had not catered or factored into running their business before, whereas that's going to be part of their daily operational expenses now.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
maintaining that, for a long period. It's not going to be for 1 or 2 days. You're going to have to maintain that cleaning regimen for the next couple of
yeah.
months.
And you're going to have to maintain that, because if you are investing all of that money in trying to keep yourself safe, sanitizing, social distancing, because there's going to be a financial investment from business owners to be able to do that effectively. If one person in your organization actually becomes infected with COVID-19 and there is any idea that it's actually come from the workplace, your workplace is going to be closed. And you're going to you're going to be audited all the time in terms of how you are actually managing managing the whole sanitation process of keeping people, keeping the spaces clean. And yeah, it's really going to be business unusual. I don't think we can emphasize that enough. I keep trying to say to people, even when there's going to be access to these spaces, it's going to be restricted access. It's going to be a new way of doing things. Don't expect that you can still adopt the same behavior. It's going to be completely different. It's going to be, you're not going to be sitting next to each other sharing a box of popcorn in the movies. It's going to be completely different. It's going to be a completely different kind of setup. So I really just think that people need to be aware of that and prepare themselves psychologically for the fact that it's going to be different. It's going to be very, very different. I also think that I think business owners need to heed the advice that they really need to sit down and say, how do we prepare ourselves post lockdown to enter into the economy and to play a significant role in the economy again. It's pivoting, but also just being, as part of that pivot, being ready to be, actually being a a business that is going to be able to operate and of course contribute to the economy. So I know you in lots of pain, and we want to just keep this show short today, but I do want to thank all our viewers on all the different social platforms. Thank you so much for being with us today. I must apologize for the fact we don't have our guest from risk disaster management, but we have had to just be very flexible and very fluid. And of course, it's just a crazy time. And unfortunately, she was required in terms of work, and operations, of course, takes precedence. So we do apologize for the fact that we don't have a guest, but we are so glad that you could be here. We would love to hear everybody else's comments on the president's announcements yesterday, and what your impressions were, and how you feel about what the president has proposed and has put on the table. And also, I think, just some predictions on what you think phase 3 of lockdown will look like, where it's going to move from this very hard lockdown to a partial lockdown. For those of us who have elderly parents, they're going to have to stay under hard lockdown, and what that's going to mean as well. And even for your staff who are at risk, how are you going to manage that? So it's going to be very interesting.
It is, and if you are part of the corporate world, and you're one of the sectors that are allowed to return back to work under a soft lockdown, tell us in the comments how you're going to be handling access control that was electronic, that you no longer can use now because you can't touch equipment with your hands. How are you going to manage access in and out of your buildings? Those are another one of the things that we're going to have to consider returning back to work. Viola, thanks very much. And sorry, everyone, to be keeping this short.
No problem at all. And then, of course, tomorrow night we have confirmed with our guest, and she has confirmed that she will be available. So we'll be speaking to a union leader, just to speak to her about how workers are being affected through this lockdown period, and what some of the main concerns are of employees at this time. Thank you, everybody. And I hope all of you have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And I really, really hope that we can have a chance to see you all again tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely. We've got a question there, so if you've got any thoughts about that, leave a note in the comment. It's a very valid comment
Mm.
um, as well. So if you've got any thoughts about that, let us know down below. So from me, Brigitte Limbanda, thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back again tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.